Oscar Wilde once wrote something to the effect that there are two tragedies in the world. One is not getting what you want, and the other is getting it. Now, the establishment of the State of Israel was no tragedy, just the opposite. It was the realization of a multi-millennial dream. But it did raise a whole series of questions of what does it mean when your dream becomes a reality. I think of Ben-Gurion's famous, it wasn't his favorite, just his famous quip about, the Jewish state is the moment, when we have pickpockets and prostitutes of our own, right? What does it actually look like when Jews have a healthcare system, when Jews have to negotiate the use of a power, when Jews have to deal with minority populations? These are questions that began in 1948 and were only asked then. And so the story of Zionism also shifted from 1948 forward. And now we're entering a new era, 70 years henceforth, with new opportunities and new challenges of its own. Now, I'm not going to steal the thunder from my opening question to our speaker, but I want everyone to appreciate just how important the first Zionist Idea book, written by Arthur Hertzberg in 1959, as a record of the Zionist story that had come up until that point, and also to appreciate the magnificent contribution that our guest this evening, Gil Troy, has made by issuing a renewed, expanded, and edited version of the Zionist, not idea, but ideas, which brings that conversation that I began in the Parsha all the way up to date in our present-day conversations. And so with that as a bit of context for this evening's program, I want to turn to our guest and ask you sort of a very simple but straightforward question of what prompted you to embark on this project of renewing, revising, expanding Arthur Hertzberg's famous book, The Zionist Idea, with now the famous Gil Troy book, The Zionist Ideas.
So indeed, I grew up in the Young Judea Zionist youth movement. I'm a kid from Queens, so I also feel like I've moved on up to the east side. This is very exciting. And to a deluxe synagogue in the sky, And for us in the Young Judea youth movement, the Zionist Idea of Arthur Hertzberg was our Zionist Bible. You read it backwards and forwards. You read little bits here and there. You interacted with the Hara'am, with Theodor Herzl. And what was the notion? That through a conversation, because what's the big headline in the 1880s, 1890s in the Jewish world, in Eastern Europe? Not the marginal movement of a couple of nudniks who are going to Palestine. The big story is this story, the New York Jewish story, the American Jewish story, 2 million Jews coming on the boat, as if there was one boat, right? And if you've been traumatized as I have by watching Barbra Streisand in Yentl, you think there was enough place to pirouette around that boat. But that's the story. And these marginal nudniks, yelling and screaming at one another, created in 1948 a state, and soon it's going to be the world's largest Jewish community. And in 1959, this rabbi, this community leader, this intellectual, Arthur Hertzberg, is asked to put together the key texts, the key ideas that created this revolution. Now think about it. In 1959, Israel is fragile. The Zionist conversation is robust. Today, Israel is robust, and the Zionist conversation has turned fragile. Shame on them. Shame on the delegitimizers. Shame on our enemies who try to steal our joy from us. But also shame on us. Shame on us for being Yids, broken down Golas Jews, broken down diaspora Jews who internalize the hatred of the other. And I'm told, why did you use that Z word? It doesn't poll well. Now, in modern America, there's no greater crime than not polling well. And I say, did Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement poll well in the 1950s? Did Betty Friedan and the feminist movement poll well in the 1960s? Would the American Revolution have polled well in the 1700s? Certainly not in New York, which was a loyalist bastion. And the Zionist movement wouldn't have polled well in the 1800s. I learn from polls, but I go beyond them. And that's P-O-L-E-S and P-O-L-L-S. So I was actually given the opportunity by the Jewish Publication Society. They own the copyright, and they said, well, you update it. Now, for me, it was an overwhelming honor to try to fill the shoes of Arthur Hertzberg, to try to update the Bible. He had 34 thinkers. Ahad Ha'am, A.D. Gordon, Theodor Herzl. In 1959, he had no bandwidth to include women like Henrietta Zold. And not including Henrietta Zold in 1959 is actually a crime against history. Including her isn't affirmative action, it's just historical justice. Not much room for Mizrahim. So I knew I had to broaden the conversation. So I thought, okay, he had 34, I'll add 16, because we're all in a base 10 culture. I'll be a hero, we'll have 50, boom. But then I discovered one other thing. I don't know if you got the memo. Most kids these days have a shorter attention span. So I had to cut, because no one's going to read a 3,500 or 4,000-word manifesto by A.D. Gordon. No one's going to read Arthur Hertzberg's majestic 100-page introduction on the philosophy and historiography of Zionism. So I did 3 moves. 1, I added the S. From the Zionist idea, we are a people. We have the rights to a particular homeland and a relationship to that homeland. Doesn't preclude others from having that homeland. And we have the rights to establish a state on that homeland. Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, and that is exactly from the Parsha. Right now we're reading about that. So I added the S, the Zionist ideas, to open up the conversation. From left to right, religious, non-religious. But also I learned from my friend Zohar Raviv, who's the education director of Birthright. The S...
Who incidentally is running the leadership Shabbaton next Shabbat.
Who knew? The S is like a question mark. And we live in a world of exclamation points. And to open up the conversation with question marks is a mark of humility, but also a way in. So the first move was from the Zionist idea to the Zionist ideas. The second move was to try to give some kind of historical context. So who were the first wave of Zionists? The founders. And I added Henrietta Zold and the poetess Rachel and Rav Uziel, the first Sephardic chief rabbi, to broaden the conversation. And then the builders from 1948 to 1998, the first 50 years.
Well, Gil, did Hertzberg get it wrong calling it the Zionist idea? Because I think even in his table of contents, right, you have the political Zionists, you have the revisionist Zionists, very dear to our sponsor's heart. We have the labor Zionists, we have the cultural Zionists. I mean, from the very beginning, to call Zionism, to suggest that it's monolithic, I think even Hertzberg would say that's a disservice to the sort of technicolor set of forces that gave rise to, you know, to the Jewish state.
Well, so before we get to the history, an important lesson for today. You need a big tent. In the spirit of Abraham, you have to have red lines. One of the things that scares me about the American Jewish community today is we're allergic to red lines. We don't have red lines in Israel, we don't have red lines on intermarriage, we don't have red lines on anything. How do you create a community without red lines? But at the same time, Abraham's tent was open to the right, to the left, to the future, and to the past. And that's the analogy. And so, yes, I think in 1959, because think of the trauma that the Jews went through, and think of the amazing vision of Theodor Herzl in Basel, pulling together these people to kind of create the Zionist movement. So the Zionist idea was, and I'm going to, because education is repetition, we are a people, we have ties to a land, we're going to establish a state. But indeed, the richness of the book was to understand that everyone came with their own melody, with their own language, with their own emphasis. And actually, this is my challenge to all of us. We need to have what I call a hyphenate Zionism. We need to go back to when they had revisionist Zionism and socialist Zionism and cultural Zionism. Because what we're doing is, what are we saying? We're saying, yes, we have a fundamental idea that unites us, but we also bring our own particular emphasis, our own particular language, our own particular melody, and that's what works for us.
Do you think all right, clearly we're going to shuttle back from history to present day. So do you think our times are the best of times or the worst of times? Meaning, I have to imagine that the early Zionist thinkers waged serious battles. And so maybe you could shed some light on some of those battles, because I wonder, we rack our brains of, is it good for the Jews? We have Beinart and Gordis going at it. We have this person and that person going at it. And I wonder to myself, well, is this what Jews have always done? Isn't this how Zionist debates have always happened? Is there a difference between our moment and the moment before of, say, the turn of the past century?
I believe that the Zionist movement became a real movement when Theodor Herzl made a mistake, and accepted the British suggestion of going to Uganda. And what happened? There was a walkout. When people walked out on Theodor Herzl at the Zionist Congress, and they said, hey, this is unacceptable. What did it mean? It showed that they were taking him seriously. And he himself pulled back and finished that Sixth Zionist Congress by saying, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. If I forget Jerusalem, may I forget my right hand, may my right hand lose its cunning. Once you're passionate, once you're engaged, once you're yelling and screaming and gesticulating, then you're in the game. What scares me today is indeed sometimes people listen censoriously, and that's not acceptable. But the thing that more scares me is our kids who just don't care. The generation she'eno yodea lishol, that doesn't know how to ask the question. Now, we're really good about that, and we're going to blame them. But you know what else scares me? This generation of parents and grandparents that lo yodea lahasbir, you don't know how to explain. Most of us are afraid of our kids. We don't know how to share our passion for the Jewish state and for the Jewish people and the Jewish community with our kids, with the next generation. And that's one of the disconnects. So I just don't want to blame the kids. I want to blame us. And learn how we go back to the text, go back to the sources. And I have to say that one of the things I'm trying to do with this book is create Zionist salons.
Have you created a curriculum with it?
Yes, www.zionistidea.com. And if you want some in Hebrew, www.zionistsalon.il. And it's happening, we've done it in the United States, we've done it in Canada, we've done it in South Africa, we've done it in the UK, and we're now doing it in Israel. Next week on Monday, I'm going to be with Natan Sharansky and Inat Wilf, talking about this in Hebrew, trying to bring the Zionist salons, because it has to happen there too. And I want people to not just listen to the expert, but to become empowered with these texts. Host the 10 or 15 nudniks that you know who really love Israel, and read some of the texts and talk through them, and then the next day, have each one of those nudniks invite 10 or 15 people who don't really get why you're so crazy about Israel, and explain. And one of the Zionist salons I have is a Zionist salon for those who are wary of coming to a Zionist salon. Overcome that. And you know what I found? People feel liberated, both in Israel and outside, when I invite them to a conversation about Israel that isn't just about Bibi or BDS or the Palestinians or the nation-state bill. And I always say to the students, I'm not afraid of those conversations. There's no question you're going to ask that's going to upset me. I've been debating and defending Israel for 20 years on campus. And I'd rather have us talk right here among the family about any difficult question. But first, let's go to the texts. Let's go to the sources. And then what happens? We get excited and we see, I might be from the left, you might be from the right, or vice versa. We agree on certain things, and then we go forward. Why do we always have to start a conversation about where the division is? Let's start on the unity and then figure out. Once we see division, then we decide, I agree on this, I disagree on that, but we're part of one family. And
so who are some of the most exciting thinkers, contemporary Israeli Zionist thinkers in your new book?
So one of the exciting things was actually not just going back to the past, but also bringing up to the future. So someone like Aleph Bet Yehoshua, the Israeli writer, has a beautiful definition of Zionism. So again, my definition is people, land, state, right? I said education is repetition. Aleph Bet Yehoshua's definition, he says a Zionist, he says Zionism isn't a badge of honor. Everybody says, I'm a Zionist, I'm a Zionist, Zionist. He says you're a Zionist if you understand that Israel is a state for all its citizens. And when he's saying that, he's saying very clearly that every Israeli Arab deserves, and by the way, Ruby Rivlin from the right, the president of the state of Israel, also defends that every Israeli Arab deserves equality, and we don't compromise on that at all. But you also understand that Israel is also the state of the Jewish people. And he says, what's the test case? The law of return. If you can accept the law of return. Now, we're here in the United States of America, which has its own immigration issues, its own immigration laws. Do you know that if I come to the United States of America and I have $500,000 and I'm going to hire 10 people, I can get a fast track to immigration? Because the United States of America says we're a capitalist country, we want capitalists. So Israel says, if you are a Jew, then you can come in and get a fast track to citizenship. If there wasn't an alternative track at the same time, then it wouldn't be a democracy. But because there's also another way, similarly that there's other ways if you don't come in with $500,000 to become an American citizen, then that's democracy. So that's the dynamic. I love Aleph Bet Yehoshuah. I have a wonderful quote from Stav Shafir, very much from the left, talk about Occupy Zionism. She says Zionism is about equality, fighting for equality. Ayelet Shaked from the right, the current justice minister, says that Zionism is about understanding that we have an opportunity as Jews to bring in Jewish ideals. And there are some amazing rabbis who are saying, wait a minute. For 2,000 years, we created a halakha, we created rules, laws, based on the absurdity of living a Jewish community in the ghetto. Beni Ish Shalom says we now have to have a theology of sovereignty. I love that phrase. A theology of sovereignty. We have to create a new understanding of what are the opportunities, halachically, religiously, for us. And I use that when I've had Zionist salons with religious Zionists. And we read that, and I go, don't you think we need to kind of have a halakha? And they go, yeah. And they go, and isn't part of it also learning about the Torah's laws of tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, go after justice in the most aggressive and creative way? And they go, yeah. I say, so why can't you, religious Zionists, sit with our friends from Meretz, the far left party, talk about your distinct visions of social justice, and put the question of borders aside? Isn't it actually a form of avodah zarah, of idol worship, to make land and settlements so central that I can't even sit with you if we disagree on that question?
It's like asking Republicans and Democrats to talk about environmental policy.
Exactly.
They might agree on that, but little else.
Let the farmer and the cowboy be friends, right? This is our challenge. We need to flip. We always start with the way we disagree, and I want to learn how we can agree.
So let's see how fast you can pivot. This is like a dream come true for me, rapid fire with Gil Troy. So, and you can reject this question. To what degree is this past...
If I won't reject it, I'll just reframe it.
You'll just reframe it. What you mean to be asking
right.
me, is the nation-state law. To what degree should that be understood in the context of the Zionist story? Or is that really just reflecting present political machinations of the State of Israel?
So the answer is yes. So first of all, I want to quote my son Yoni's army commander.
Is everyone aware of what I'm referring to when I say the nation-state law? So legislation passed this past summer. There were about 12 bullet points on it. On the one hand, and then there's a debate whether it was a no big deal or a very big deal. It downgraded the status of Arabic. It had some questions about, it affirmed what Israel's symbols were. It affirmed the Jewishness of the state. I'm not going to be able to get all of them out. Some responded saying, well, this is what Israel's been all along. It's simply sort of codifying that. And some said that this is serving to play out an end game of creating one sovereign, undemocratic Jewish state. Is that fair? I
yeah.
don't know if
So the brief answer. My son was in Kurs Ksanim, in officer training school when that happened, and the mifaked, the head of the officer training, called them together and said, this nation-state bill was passed. I want to give you all homework. Read it. In the Army, they're very careful not to go political. He said, just read it. Before you read the commentary, the analysis, read it. And you'll read that most of it is parv, is kosher apple pie. It's that the flag is blue and white, and it's the flag of the Jewish people, and it has the Magen David, the Jewish star, and that Israel is the Jewish homeland, and on and on and on. So that's my first short answer. My longish answer. We're sitting around. By the way, I have an affiliation with McGill University, but 10 years ago, my wife, 4 kids, and I went on sabbatical to Israel and never quite succeeded in leaving. So turned to the world's longest sabbatical. So we live in Israel, and as you can hear, I have a son serving in the army. We're sitting around Shabbat lunch. One of his friends comes in, and he starts telling this crazy story about he's in the Air Force, and they were doing an imun, a practice about what happens during wartime. Now, sometimes during wartime, what happens? Somebody dies. So they practiced going to the funeral. And when you leave base, not everybody comes with their weapons. One person is designated to be the bodyguard, and he's protecting the other 40 people in the unit. They get to the cemetery, and the rabbi, in this fake funeral with a fake body, in a fake cemetery, right, but they get there 40 minutes away, says, is anybody a Kohen, a priest? And my son's friend, who has the neshek, who has the arms, says, I am. He goes, well, you can't enter. Now, because he can't enter this fictitious cemetery with this fictitious body, they can't protect the kids. So they go back to the army base to get a different person, because he also can't relinquish his weapon because he signed out. It's on him. So they have to go back to the base, sign it out. Now, this is the test. If you find that charming, as I do, you get the Jewishness of the state. If you go, as one of my friends, when I'm telling that story, go, oh, well, that's religious discrimination, and that's kfiyat datit, that's religious authoritarianism, you don't get it. So I tell that story as a way of saying that was the play in the nation-state bill. The beauty of the nation-state bill was understanding that, first of all, there's a Declaration of Independence, which says that all inhabitants are equal. No judge worth his or her salt in Israel would read the final nation-state bill without first reading the Declaration of Independence and the 2 previous basic laws. Israel doesn't have a constitution because they have this thing called the Torah. So they had the Declaration of Independence, then they added 2 bills, and now a fourth bill, because people felt like things weren't balanced. So I call it the right bill in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because fundamentally, it reaffirmed those notions of the Jewishness of the state. But unfortunately, we have a prime minister today, I'm trying not to be too political, who chose to use that not to reach out and get 80 votes and unite the country, but to just pass it with 64 votes and play, I'm sorry, I'm going to criticize and comment to the yahoos. And he could have just added a sentence quoting the Declaration of Independence about equality. He could have added a sentence to make my Israeli Arab cousins and brothers and friends more comfortable, and he didn't. And that's on him. And that will affect his historic legacy. It certainly affects my perception of him. And this is, you see, so I can accept 90% of the law and criticize 10%. But what I don't do, and what hurts me about what happens so often in the American Jewish community, is people forget about the 90% with which they agree, and they go, you see, I give up. And if I can add one more line to this long-winded answer, right now we're living what I'm calling the Trump-opportunity. 80% of the American Jewish community hates Donald Trump, detests Donald Trump, abhors Donald Trump. I call my friend Steve, who lives here on the Upper West Side, I say, how's the weather? He goes, did you see his latest tweet? We can't. But they're not moving to Canada, which is the capital of niceness, and they're not moving to Israel. What was the resistance all about? What was what happened in November all about? Saying, I disagree with Donald Trump, and therefore I'm going to vote against him. With Israel, we're in what I call the delegitimization derby. I disagree with this policy. I dislike this prime minister. I dislike the occupation, therefore I give up on Israel. Double down. That's loyalty. That's patriotism. That's community. And shame on us for putting Israel on probation. There's no other country in the world whose legitimacy is on probation. And it's bad enough that the rest of the world does it. But it's a sin that too many Jews do it.
So, in Brandeis's moment, the challenge in the famous essay, which is in both, is that there's no contradiction between an American's patriotism and their Zionism. And he famously sort of untangled that knot in a moment where Jews were facing accusations of dual loyalty. So what would Brandeis say today is the fundamental tension of the American Jewish community when it comes to Israel?
The new challenge in American Zionism is this. Can we indulge in a joke?
Absolutely.
So, you know those old, awful, I'm going to be politically incorrect for a second, light bulb jokes? How many therapy patients does it take to change a light bulb? You can only change if you're ready to change. How many gurus does it take to change a light bulb? We don't need a light bulb, we have inner light. How many men does it take to screw in a light bulb? They hold it and they assume the world revolves around them. How many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's not funny. How many Zionists, how many American Zionists does it take to screw in a light bulb? 1, to screw in the light bulb. 2, to dance around, go, wow, look how we're returning to the land and we're returning to our power and returning to our autonomy. The 4th, to write the check. And the 5th, to complain about media coverage. Once upon a time, American Zionism, Brandeis Zionism, was those poor schnooks over there. They didn't come to the right gold. This is the real promised land, right? They went to that one, but we'll support them because we're good people and we have the sense of Jewish peoplehood solidarity. Today, I think what Brandeis would recognize, and what we all have to recognize, is it's not that. We're not in the age of mutual condescension, where American Jews think Israel's about to go down the toilet, and Israeli Jews think American Jews are about to assimilate or be anti-Semitized into oblivion. We work together. And I'm calling that identity Zionism. And it goes back to your question also about what has to happen in Israel today. Israelis and American Jews and Jews all over the world have to understand that it's very complicated in the modern world to find roots, to find community, to find anchors. I'm not arrogant enough to say that Zionism is the best way or the only way, but it's our way. And it's been going on. It gets us into a conversation that's not just about last week's most forwarded YouTube video of some baby drooling or some cat rolling around. It's history. It roots us in the past, and it connects us to each other. And that's a great gift. So Zionism is saying we are lucky to be a part of this modern world right now, and identity Zionism is saying that by connecting to the Jewish people, by connecting to the Jewish state, we remember and realize that we're bigger than just our own self. And that, if you read Viktor Frankl, if you read the Torah, if you read the Zionists, is the way to live, the way to find meaning in life.
See, I have this theory, Gil, and let me test it out on you. There was once a book, book of short stories by Nathan Englander about what we are talking about when we talk about Anne Frank. That when Jews sit around and talk about Anne, did anyone read this? When we're talking about Anne Frank, we're really not talking about Anne Frank. We're actually talking about some sort of fears that the Jewish people have about how well accepted they are. I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. And I wrote my doctoral thesis on a certain thinker in the 1950s who made his career on the subject of revelation. And if you read in the 1950s, everyone's arguing about revelation. Is the Torah from Sinai? Is it not from Sinai? Otherwise, my thesis there is they're really not talking about revelation. They're actually arguing over how to make sense of a post-Holocaust world. So my theory about present-day American Jewry is that when we're all arguing over Israel, some of us might be arguing actually over Israel, but we're actually not arguing over Israel. We're actually arguing over anxieties playing out within American Jewry. That it's become proxy, like a Rorschach test, for the challenges and the opportunities sort of that we have to deal with ourselves. That it becomes much easier to call someone a self-hating Jew, Zionist, or a colonialist oppressor, or to write a check to AIPAC, or to do this, that, the other, than it is just to light Shabbos candles at your table. And it's become this sort of language, this secular, civil religion and debate and discourse, and toxic oftentimes. But if I were to put American Jewry in a therapist's couch, I would say, is that really the issue? Or is there something underneath that we just complain and kvetch about Netanyahu when we should be dealing with ourselves? I don't know. You think there's a there there?
I think there is a there. Look, we last saw each other, but we didn't see each other at the GA. And what was so upsetting to me about the GA, the General Assembly of the Federations, which was in Tel Aviv.
When I was gone that week.
So give him credit.
No one noticed.
He wasn't abandoning you. He was leading the Jewish people. Was that what I learned was that the phrase Israel-diaspora relations was basically code word for why Israel sucks. Pardon my crassness, but I'm from Queens. And why we use Israel as an excuse for assimilation and intermarriage and all that. And I actually think that, look, what was Zionism about? What was the 1897 Basel Conference about? It was, what's the Jewish problem? And how are we going to solve it? And in 1897, the main Jewish problem was anti-Semitism, but also assimilation. Today, the Jewish problem, the Jewish anxiety is, will our kids and grandkids not only be Jewish, but have as robust and as intense and as multidimensional a relationship with Israel and the Jewish people and the Jewish past and Judaism and ethics as we do? And how do we pass it on? And that's the challenge. But I want to hijack this moment and turn it to you. You've written and spoken very eloquently about the challenge of speaking about Israel to your daughters and to the next generation. You're on the front lines. I'm living in Jerusalem, so it's easy for me to sort of just build my castles on the air. Has anything I said today been useful to you? And what?
I'm writing notes. I'm going to steal your
stuff.
No,
I'm serious, and I'm not asking for flattery. And how do you explain to the kids what this thing is? How do you invite them in? How do you make sure that you still have a job 5 years from now, 10 years from now, with people coming in to the pews?
Look,
when there's golfing to do and there's YouTubing to do and there's so much more fun than coming in to pray.
Look, I have been blessed, some might say, with a community with all sorts of opinions within. So I'm careful, as I'm saying, and I think that exactly what you're saying, Gil, about being able to celebrate the built-in pluralism of the Zionist conversation, that there's more than one way to be a Zionist, was a project of Hertzberg and your project that you're renewing today. Because I think one of the problems, or perhaps the biggest problem when it comes to Zionism in North America, is the claim, the misguided claim, that there's only one way to do it. And I think that if I've tried to model anything for our community and for my children and my household, is that the Jewish discussion on Israel has always run the range. And that if you are interested, I once invited someone to the community and I got a lot of pushback because it didn't fit into some groups in the community notion of what a Zionist congregation should house. And I said, if you're interested in a Jewish, democratic, secure state of Israel, then we will welcome you here at Park Avenue Synagogue. If you're not interested in a Jewish state, if you're not interested in a democratic state, et cetera, then you don't. And you might disagree and agree with that, but those people have a place to be part of that Zionist dialogue. So that's sort of number one. I do believe that the second thing is I try not to lead with my chin, or you know, sometimes I quote Vince Lombardi, who said something, I always mix it up. It's either the best offense is a good defense, or the other way around. Mm-hmm. But any study I've heard about Israel engagement, education, and otherwise has signaled that the greatest indicator when it comes to attachment to Israel is not this or that policy of the Netanyahu government or another government, but it is one's connection to Judaism. That a robust, or sociologists talk about a thick versus a thin Jewish identity. A thick Jewish identity can withstand all sorts of things, all sorts of challenges. And so for me, my day job, I remind myself, is not to be an outpost for AIPAC or J Street or any other organization, but to be a generator of Jewish life. I am incredibly proud, like moved beyond, that in a week and a half, 450 plus congregants are going to be traveling to Israel on a congregational mission. This, Gil, is the largest synagogue mission to the state of Israel since its founding.
I'm in shock. When you said large, I thought 45.
No.
So 450 is like mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Really, it's amazing.
And those Jews run a range of views. But I think, and I can take some of the credit, but it's a reflection. A rabbi is only as good as the community he or she leads. It reflects a cultural hope and aspiration, which is actualized, that this is a community that celebrates that we can stand here, we can stand there, but we stand together with Israel. My fear, and this is something that you and I have discussed offline, is that what I would describe as the sane center is under attack from the far left and the far right.
Absolutely.
That the ones who have the loudest megaphones are the ones who are sort of, you say anything that is critical of the Netanyahu government, you're labeled a self-hating Jew. Or if you say anything that's in the defense of the Netanyahu government, you're labeled a colonialist oppressor. And I think that sort of language is A, sickening, B, toxic, and reminiscent of the verse from Jeremiah that your enemies will come from within you. And for me, I think given the blessings of woken up to a 1,700 plus congregation in the middle of New York, that for what reason have we arrived here at this moment? And for me, it's to try to empower and give a megaphone to the sane center. So,
well, I'll really give you a standing ovation if every one of those gets a copy of the Zionist Ideas, but that's a whole other conversation.
Well,
but,
that's up to Maury.
No, it's an amazing. It's a beautiful way you're framing it, and it really is about Jewishness, right? I mean, look, at the end of the day, what was the Zionist Project? The Zionist Project was saying, we want to continue. We want to survive. We want to live. I tried to find one text to put in the Zionist idea that would just be normal. That would just be, I just want to live and I don't want to dream. But Jewish nationalism is like American nationalism. You can't talk about it without dreaming. It goes back to that first word you used, aspirational. And the way I think about it is kind of like, a bird, if it stops flapping its wings, it plummets. American nationalism and Jewish nationalism are both birds that are constantly flapping their wings, constantly soaring, constantly reaching higher. And what do you flap? A left wing and a right wing. And that's how you go forward.
That's very nice.
And also in the Jewish community, you flap the diaspora wing and the Israeli wing. We need one another. I'm so tired of this either-orness, and I agree with you. that we need to build together. But can we talk about nationalism for one thing?
Yeah, well,
very important.
All right, we'll talk about this, and then we're going to take some questions. So this is the last, and then we're going to open it up. Deal? So, because that was going to be my final question for you, which is we live in a time when nationalism has become a bad word.
Right.
And I just kind of, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that. Here in Europe and in Israel, where does Zionism fit in that?
So this is toxic. Let me just put on my American history hat, take off my kippah. I can't explain America without American nationalism. I can't explain the American Revolution. I can't explain the Civil War, which defeated slavery. I can't explain Abraham Lincoln, who talked about mystic chords of memory and the better angels of our nature, and mentioned the word nation 5 times in the 272-word Gettysburg Address. I can't talk about Franklin Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. I can't talk about John F. Kennedy's ask not if what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I can't talk about Betty Friedan. I can't talk about Martin Luther King. I can't talk about America without nationalism. And when Donald Trump, whether you love him or hate him, gets up and tries to put his big gold T on nationalism and says in Houston, we're nationalists, use it, use it. And shame on him for claiming that it's only his, and shame on the left for abdicating. I say we got to take back the night. And then Zionism. If we give up, when you get to campus, the biggest problem isn't anti-Semitism, and the biggest problem isn't anti-Zionism, and the biggest problem isn't BDS or intersectionality. The biggest problem is this. We tell our kids and our grandkids that the most important piece of real estate in their young life is not their home, it's not their homeland, it's the college campus that accepts them, that admission ticket. The pressure we put them under to have the perfect CV and the perfect GPA and write that insane essay that I'm 17 and I saved the world and I'm the most perfect person and that's why I have Harvard or U Penn or NYU has to accept me. And then they get to college and what happens? They're told nationalism is for boobs and religion is for idiots. And we eviscerate their identities. We're not going to change the college campuses. But we have to prepare our kids and our grandkids for that eventuality, because that's what they're going to hit. So indulge me one final story. How do I explain nationalism? I steal from one of my 168 co-stars in that book, not this one. Zev Magen writes this crazy book. It's a crazy book because he calls it a philosophical rampage. And the book is called John Lennon and the Jews. What's John Lennon's most famous post-Beatles song? Imagine. Imagine there's no country. Imagine there's no borders. Imagine there's no nationalism. Imagine there's no heaven. He says, Zev Magen says, that's my nightmare. I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't want to live in a world with no red lines. I don't want to live in a world with no borders. I don't want to live, as Mama Troy warns, in a world that you're so open-minded your brains fall out. That was Stalin's vision. That was Pol Pot's vision. Strip people of their identity. Strip people of their nationalism. And what do? We sacrifice human beings on the altar of this false humanity. And how does he explain it? And with this I'll end. He says, from a heterosexist male perspective, you fall in love with an amazing woman. And what do? You invite her to Tavera. You invite her to Tavera, the Italian restaurant. You have to break your piggy bank in order. But first, you have a cousin on 47th Street. He gets you a good deal, and you get the rock. And you put the rock in your pocket. You hope she doesn't notice that you're limping. And at a certain point, before dessert, you pull out the rock. You get down on your hands and you say, I love you, I love you, I love you. I love you so much. I love you as much as every woman in this restaurant. I love you as much as every woman I've ever gone out with. I love you as much as my Aunt Gladys and my Aunt Flo and my grandma and my mother because I love humanity. I'm a citizen of the world. And he says, as the love of your life walks out on you, and as you have a new pain, let's just say in your heart, you've discovered that love is preferential. You've discovered that true love is by focusing on an individual's significant other, and from there building to family, and from there building to community, and from there building to nation, but not being so universal that you have no connection. And sometimes love is hard. Not in my personal marriage relationship, but I read in the New York Times all this love advice because true love is overcoming the problems. And that's nationalism. And that's the argument we're not making. So we have to make an argument about loyalty, which comes from love. We have to make an argument about nationalism, which is the source of identity. And we have to understand that we are rooted in a story. I'm an American historian. I tell stories in decades. I go to England and I count in centuries. I come to Israel and I count in millennia. We're rooted in something very, very deep. And what's this synagogue all about and the 450 people? Connected in community. So if I may, Rabbi, bless you, my children. May we be connected in our roots and we be connected to one another. And that's the Zionist story. That's the Jewish story. That's the Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove story. So thank you.
Gil, thank you. Thank you for your graciousness and your kindness. Let's open it up for a few questions.
Would you agree that when it comes to certain people using certain terms or phrases, we praise or criticize according to the person?
Absolutely.
So if, for example, Donald Trump uses the word nationalism or nationalist, he's going to be widely praised or widely criticized. If somebody else uses the same term, it might be in a different context, he's going to be praised or criticized according to who he is.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you. So the challenge is here. We can't shoot the messenger, right? This is what's going on campus today. On campus, look at me. I'm a case of arrested development. I made it to college and I never left. I became a professor. I love the university. But I love a university where you ask difficult questions. I love a university where you're critical. I love a university where if I disagree with you, I sit down and talk to you. Do you know when I stood up for Zionism at McGill University, I was treated like I was involved in some kind of sex scandal. They stopped talking to me. Not one person came up to me and said, you know, I really disagree with what you said, let's talk. And this is toxic.
You said that the strongest indicator of someone's attachment to Israel is their Judaism. But what concerns me is that the statistics that say that 65% of American Jews marry out and 85% of Israeli Jews that live in America marry out. So not all of them will stay Jewish. I don't know what percentage, but that's not a very good indicator of who's going to be a supporter of Israel.
Well, this is why I call it identity Zionism. Because what I want to do is I want to use the Zionist story and our sense of solidarity and loyalty as a way of bringing Jews back in. The old guilt trip of thou shalt not intermarry doesn't work. The only educational move that I can think of is to make it an I statement. That for me, being Jewish is so important. For me, establishing a Jewish home is so important. And I know that 2 times 1 is 2, and so 2 for the price of 1 is better in this world, going back to the Kuba soup analogy, that has so many lures outside of the Jewish world, so many ways to not be Jewish, that if the 2 of us are together in that bond on Jewishness, we're better off. So it doesn't mean that I'm better than somebody else. It doesn't mean that I'm superior to somebody else. It doesn't mean that I can't even love someone else. But I want to, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to that kind of eternal partnership, when it comes to family building, I need that Jewish partner so I can build a Jewish home. That's the only way I can explain it. And I say that every intermarriage is a love story. I'm so careful not to demonize and not to disrespect. But it also is a national tragedy. And so the challenge is, how do we invite people in to a conversation in which they understand? And then, when there is an intermarriage, one of the great failures we have, and I'm not the theologian here, you are, is that I think that too often the conversion process is about religion and not about peoplehood. And I don't think we spend enough time teaching peoplehood, which is the key to making the Jewish future.
Isn't the true definition of being a Zionist being there, moving there physically? Can you talk about that?
So Rabbi David Hartman had a great line. He was a rabbi in Montreal for many years, and he said he made Aliyah, he moved to Israel, because he finally decided to take his sermon seriously. And in 1975, I came from Queens to Midtown Manhattan when that awful resolution was passed in the United Nations, UN Resolution 3379, saying Zionism is racism. And we all protested against it. And it was a remarkable moment because it wasn't just the Jews who showed up. Blacks showed up, Christians showed up, left showed up, the right showed up. And everybody had this little blue and white button, remember it, saying, I am a Zionist? And we in the youth movement said, oh my goodness, this is terrible. It's terrible because a Zionist, there's a certain purity to the word. And everybody, some Queen's garbage man, some person who doesn't really understand that Zionism is about living in Israel is wearing that button. Halavai, we should have that problem today, where every American is expressing their love for Israel and Jewish people. Although we should point out, God bless America, 75% of Americans still stand by Israel, despite whatever you read in the media. Zionism started as a movement in the diaspora to solve the Jewish problem. I, as someone who made Aliyah, will never judge any Jew. In the same way that the Lubavitch rabbi said there's no such thing as a bad Jew, I also say the same thing. So to me, if you get A, that we're a people, B, that we have ties to a particular homeland, and that we have the right to establish a state, you're a Zionist. You're in my tent. On the Zionist rung of achievement, is going on Aliyah a higher status? You have an opportunity to live it? Great. But I know how bizarre it was that I ended up there. And so I invite people to consider the opportunity, but I think we spend too much time judging people on whether they fit this or not. If you get those basic definitions, I'm with you, and if you don't, then you're outside that tent. You still might be a nice person, I still might go out with you to Tavera, but you're not a Zionist. Zionism is about that, and Zionism is about saying that this tool, this thing called Israel, this amazing thing called peoplehood, is a way of reinforcing the Jewish family and creating the continuity that you work on every single day. And that's the issue we should be debating.
Right,
how to be better Zionists.
I do think it's funny because maybe I'm more guilt-ridden than you. I do think that there are certain wrestlings that that reflect a dynamic Jewish identity. I don't know if God hears my prayers or not, but every morning I put on tefillin. I don't know, I probably don't keep kosher to a certain degree that I'm sure some Jew in this world does, but for me, being a Jew means to actively wrestle with what does it mean to live a life of halakha, of Jewish law. I believe that a full Jewish identity has Israel at its center. That from the promise to Abraham and all the way through, to be Jewish is to be connected to the land. Period. So I recognize that for the last 70 years, that option has been there. And for the last 40-some years, that option has been an option for me that I have not acted on. And I live with that every single day. And I wrestle with that every single day. And I don't yet know how the story is going to turn out. But it's not a contract year. But I think to live a full Jewish life means to always ask yourself that question, that Zionism involves the upbuilding of the land.
Someone told me about a crazy study that in the Shoah, the three groups of Jews who survived were communists, religious Jews, and Zionists. Natan Sharansky says that in the Gulag, the ones who survived were Pentecostalists and Jews. What connects Pentecostalists, Jews, communists, religious? They had something to go back to. They had an ideology and they had a community. Right now, one of the things that scares me about the university, and again, I love the university world, 50% of the kids at Yale University, which was used to be known as the Happy Ivy, at one point during their 4 years will seek psychological counseling. Now, I don't disrespect anybody who seeks psychological counseling, but what's going on? Part of it is the pressure that we put our kids under to perform, to succeed, what I mentioned earlier. But that's not the only part of it. The other part of it is that I believe that we've stripped them of our identity. We live in the world of me, the my, the more, the now. The higher up you go in the sociological chain, the upper middle class are starving for some meaning. Zionism is in the meaning business. Judaism is in the meaning business. So in the most utilitarian way, not in an ideological way, I quote Viktor Frankl, and I quote Natan Sharansky, and I quote Nelson Mandela, and I quote rabbis like Elliot Cosgrove, and I say, we're so lucky to be part of this conversation, not just about how do I succeed, but about who am I, and how do I find meaning in life. And this is a tool to find meaning in life, to find something greater than the GPA and greater than yourself. We're a part of something. We're a part of an amazing history. We're a part of an amazing community. And we're a part of this amazing story. I can't think of a more romantic story than a story of a people so humiliated, so broken up, so beaten down, so destroyed, so insulted, who come back to their land and flourish. And not just because they create Startup Nation and cherry tomatoes, but because they created life, and they created justice, and they created dilemot, and they created community, and they created meaning, and they created stupid little kovatembles and songs and dances and all the things that make life sweet and make life fun. You want to turn away from it? Fine. But what an opportunity to embrace something that's a part of us and that's greater than us, and that can help us find a path to meaning in a world, in a culture, in a Western society which tries stripping us of that and making us focus on Beyonce and all this idiocy. We have an opportunity to touch profundity, not in the heavens, but in the earth, and make it better. Wow. I'm lucky to live in Israel. We're lucky to be a part of this conversation. We're lucky to be Zionists. I don't care if we don't poll well. We're doing well. Thank you very much.
Friends, thank you so much to Gil Troy. Thank you to Mara. Thank you to Thea and Rebecca and all of you for being here.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.